March the 14th, 1938, Adolf Hitler rode into Vienna in Austria to the cheers of 8 million people. Vienna was the city of his youth, and that day he came home a conquering hero. Hitler's destiny drew him to Vienna's Hofburg Palace, house and home of the great Habsburg Empire. Inside, displayed in regal splendor, were the priceless treasures of the ancient monarchy. Among all the remarkable crown jewels, Hitler's eyes were magnetically drawn to a plain, unremarkable lance. Latin words were engraved on the blade, Lanciae et Globus Domini. This is the lance and nail of Christ. For more than an hour, Hitler stared at it, transfixed by his destiny. Later that night, Hitler issued 2 orders: arrest all the Jews in Vienna and take the Holy Lance and the Habsburg treasures to Germany. Hitler now believed he held the power to conquer the world. Why did Adolf Hitler covet this most holy artifact? What mystical power did it have? And why, for 2,000 years, have so many great emperors, evil dictators, and noble kings fought to the death for the right to carry the Holy Lance into battle? And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? A witness said, this one is calling for Elijah. Immediately, a bystander ran to get a sponge. He soaked it in wine and, putting it on a reed, offered him a drink. But the rest said, wait, let us see if Elijah comes to save him. But Jesus cried out again in a loud voice and gave up his spirit. The crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth in 33 A.D. is one of the most important events in the history of mankind, a point from which all time is dated. For 2 billion Christians, Jesus was God himself in the form of a man, and he died on the cross for one reason: redemption of the soul by Almighty God. This belief is so revered that the instruments of his execution have taken on sacred Christian significance. The cross, the very nails through his hands, his crown of thorns, and a Roman warrior's lance which pierced his side. Their importance is such that they have been sought after by some of the most powerful and influential men in history. It is now accepted that there was a man named Jesus crucified around 33 A.D. The Christian sources are the 4 Gospels of St. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the central event in each is the trial and execution of Jesus, known as the Passion. The crucifixion scenes in Matthew, Mark, and Luke differ dramatically from that told by John. He alone described the actions of Roman centurions ordered to break the legs of the condemned men to make sure they died before the Sabbath. When they came to Jesus, he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one soldier thrust a lance into his side, and immediately blood and water flowed out. This according to the Gospel of John.
The story of the lance piercing Jesus' side is almost certainly historical, because Scholars examining the Gospels believe that the most historical parts of the Gospel narratives are the so-called Passion narratives. This was the central episode in the life of Jesus, and the memory of this was pressed upon every early Christian. And so the soldier piercing the side of Jesus is in fact likely to be an accurate incident in the account of the execution.
If the accounts of the centurion in John's Gospel are true, the warrior's name was Longinus.
By the 5th and 6th centuries, an apocryphal gospel known as the Acts of Pilate combined the lance episode found in John's Gospel with the Gospel's account of a centurion standing beneath the cross, giving him the name Longinus.
These sources are so much later than the Gospel accounts or even the actual episode of the crucifixion of Jesus. This name is not likely to have a historical basis. In fact, it is probably a common Roman name that was invented by the early church.
Longinus is probably a mythical name, but the lance is real, and it's said to have mystical powers. When Longinus pierced Christ's side, the warrior had an infected eye, but the blood of Christ splashed on his face, and his eye was cured. Longinus went through a spiritual conversion and became a Christian. This was just the first of many amazing coincidences connected to the lance.
In the 13th century, a Dominican by the name of Jacopus da Voragine gathered all the legends dealing with Longinus, and it is from his account that we really get a detailed, colorful story, which in fact is what you find represented in the art of the West.
Whoever that centurion was, and whatever had happened on Mount Calvary, there remain two indisputable facts. Longinus was a soldier in the Roman army, and the lance belonged to the emperor. Finely forged, this Roman warrior's weapon was well-earned and well cared for. Longinus belonged to a division based at the Roman fortress in Jerusalem. It was here, in the Roman armory, that Longinus brought the lance that pierced Christ's side. What would it have looked like, and how did the early Christians identify it?
What the actual lance looked like, we don't know for sure, but based upon studies of similar artifacts, the lance would have been about 6 feet long. It would have been a wooden shaft. At one end would have been a metal point that might have been up to about 1 foot long. The pilum, as it was called, was designed for throwing at short range, but it could be used for thrusting or stabbing, as it was in this case.
In 66 AD, the Jews seized the armory, and the Holy Lance disappeared. Early Christian traditions say the lance was delivered into safe hands, hidden, and protected during the Jewish revolt and subsequent Roman purges. 80 years later, in 135 AD, Emperor Hadrian sought to destroy the last relics of Christ and ordered the total destruction of Jerusalem. All Jews were expelled from the city. Those who believed in Christ were tolerated as a minority in the Greco-Roman city. What happened to the lance? What is known is that the Roman Catholic Church kept the remains of martyred saints. But Christ left no relics, so the lance that pierced his side became a treasured and closely guarded secret. With the passing of time, the legend of the Holy Lance grew and grew. Soon, this inanimate object became a mystical symbol of the power of belief. People were told that the lance had power, so they believed it had power, so it did. Before long, even the mightiest rulers of the world were seduced by this simple belief. And thus, the Holy Lance became an object of unbelievable obsession. The lance that pierced the side of Christ remained hidden for nearly 300 years after his death. Then, during the greatest archaeological expedition of the ancient world, the excavation of Jerusalem, the lance was found. The epic expedition was ordered after a dream of Helena, the mother of Emperor Constantine. In her dream, she was led to the holy sites of Jesus of Nazareth.
There was a temple of Venus in the city. Helena was taken there, and she ordered its demolition. And under the foundations of the Temple of Venus, they found a rock-cut tomb, which she believed, and others believed, was the tomb of Jesus, where, of course, is today the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Helena's expedition uncovered the place of Christ's crucifixion, the present site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Even more dramatic was her discovery of the actual artifacts used 300 years earlier in the execution of Jesus: the actual crown of thorns, some of the horrid nails, and the wooden cross on which he died.
How did she decipher which one was the true cross of Christ? Well, she had a corpse brought in of a dead man and applied the cross to the corpse. The first cross did nothing, the second cross did nothing, and the third cross caused the dead man to rise up, and he was revived. And so therefore it was seen as a divine validation that this was indeed the true cross of Christ.
It all sounds highly improbable, yet this was extensively documented and confirmed by witnesses and carefully recorded by subsequent historians. To the people of the time, the magical powers of holy relics were believed without question. This happened to the Emperor Constantine in the year 312 AD. Prior to the great Battle of Milvain Bridge, Constantine looked toward the midday sun and saw a cross of light. Under it were the words, "By this, conquer." Constantine adopted the cross as a symbol of his rule, embraced Christianity, and became ruler of the entire Roman Empire.
I tend to think that the conversion was a genuine religious experience because I don't think that there were many practical reasons in 312 AD for Constantine to convert to Christianity. The number of Christians in the empire was very small at that time. Christians were not politically powerful or well-connected. There were few Christians in the army at this time.
Helena returned to Rome with her sacred booty. She could have demanded the Holy Lance, but she did not. Sacred objects were not items to be paraded around like war trophies. Sacrilege was a serious sin, and even the mother of the emperor could not avoid the eternal punishment for that. Instead, Helena and Constantine ordered an empire-wide church-building program as an act of devotion. Pilgrimages to the holy sites were encouraged. It is from one of these pilgrims that we have the first written historical account of the whereabouts of the lance.
In the 6th century, a pilgrim visiting Jerusalem by the name of Antoninus says that he went to the Basilica of Mount Sion in Jerusalem and there saw the Holy Lance erected in such a way that it formed a cross. And this is the first time you hear of the lance mentioned by a pilgrim and recorded in a recording that has survived to this day.
Constantine did not have the lance, but he had the nails. To emphasize his divine rulership, he had the nails converted into symbols of the empire. One was cast into a crown, another was made into a second lance. According to tradition, Constantine used this lance to draw out the boundaries of his new capital city, Constantinople.
The lance is connected in some sources with the foundation of Constantinople, which would then become the capital of the entire empire and would survive for 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire, become known to us as the Byzantine Empire.
lance and crown were sacred relics denoting power. Constantine brought them to Constantinople, which proved to be wise. When the Western Roman Empire fell to the barbarian tribes, their leaders, from Alaric the Bold to Attila the Hun, demanded the lance as part of their peace treaty with Rome. Even pagan warriors believed in the mystical powers of the lance. But the leaders and popes of the 5th century did not hand over either of the two lances regarded as holy relics. Both remained under the watchful eye of the Byzantine emperors until the Persians sacked Jerusalem in 614 AD.
When Jerusalem was captured in the year 614, and someone managed to break off the tip of the blade of the lance and escaped to Constantinople. When the Byzantine emperor Heraclius recaptured Jerusalem in the year 670, he restored the relics to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But the tip of the blade, which had been broken off earlier in that century, was left in Constantinople.
The lance of Longinus was now broken, but its mystical power was not diminished, it was increased. There were now two sites that could claim possession of the lance on which the blood of Christ had flowed. The shaft and neck of the original lance resided in Jerusalem, and the broken tip was taken to St. Sophia Cathedral and later to the Chapel of Pharaohs in Constantinople. As long as a lance remained in Constantinople, the emperor was seen as God's appointed ruler on earth. While the Holy Lance resided in Constantinople, in 712 AD, the Arabs conquered Seville in Spain to control the Mediterranean and all of the Middle East. In China, the Tang dynasty became the center of art and learning in the Far East, and in 742 AD, King Charlemagne was born and grew to be the first Holy Roman Emperor and guided Western Europe out of the Dark Ages. Charlemagne was proclaimed the first king of the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD. One enduring symbol of his rule was his possession of the Holy Lance. He was the first in a long line of rulers to use the power of the lance to hold his empire together. In centuries to come, it would aid Saxon kings of England, Henry I of Germany, and Otto I of Austria. All would carry the lance into battle. All would win great victories, and all would pay homage to the unbeatable power of the holy relic, and they would fight to the death to keep it. 25 years before Charlemagne became king, the Pope gave him a lance he said had been carried by Constantine in battle, the Lance of St. Maurice. Charlemagne believed it was the actual lance of Christ, wielding divine power.
The emperor who possessed the relics of Christ, the Holy Lance, and the part of the Holy Cross, the guarantee that he is always victorious, because in the end of the world, Christ will be the Christ of the whole world. And the emperor had also the function to defend the empire of Christ against all enemies. And therefore, it had been believed that he will be always victorious because he owns the original arms of Christ.
This lance had a distinct 7th century design, but it's unlikely that this was the original lance of Constantine. To the people of Charlemagne's empire, that didn't matter. The Pope said it was the Holy Lance, and it had shavings from the holy nails delivered from Jerusalem by Helena to Constantine. To them, it was truly sacred.
Just by merely touching the original relic, in a way, you kind of clone the relic, and it becomes that which has touched the original itself becomes holy. And so there's this profusion of lances, profusion of nails.
That sacredness was enhanced by the phenomenal victories by Charlemagne in battles against the Saxons and the Muslims. He personally carried it through the conquest of Jerusalem, and his troops believed they were unbeatable so long as they fought with the lance. Then one day, while riding through a stream, Charlemagne dropped the holy blade. His soldiers thought this a terrible omen, and they were right. Charlemagne died soon after in 814. After Charlemagne's death, the Holy Lance became the trophy of kings throughout Europe. In the early 900s, it appeared among the treasures of a Saxon king in England. He sold it to an Italian count, who gave it as a gift to King Rudolph of Burgundy. Rudolph, knowing its importance to the Holy Roman Empire, shrewdly ransomed it. He made a deal with Henry I of Germany, trading the lance of St. Maurice for the entire province of Bâle, Switzerland.
To give you an idea of the importance, when the King of Burgundy gave the Holy Lance to the King of the Holy Roman Empire, Henry I gave instead, in exchange, to the King of Burgundy, the city of Bâle, now in Switzerland, Bâle on the Rhine. So a whole city was a prize for the importance of the Holy Lance, that you can understand only by medieval thinking.
The lance was, in the early Germanic world, a sign and symbol of rulership. The ruler was, in some sense, God's representative on earth. And because of this, a weapon which is a symbol of rulership and is conferred upon the new ruler at the time of his accession in a religious ceremony. The weapon becomes a religious symbol as well as being a symbol of government and rulership.
Henry I is regarded as the founder of modern Germany, and he became the first in a long line of German kings and emperors to covet the lance. Henry believed he had been chosen by God to be the rightful heir to the Holy Roman Empire of Constantine, but the current pope did not. To prove his ascension to the people, Henry showed the lance. So began a struggle between the secular and spiritual rulers that would last for centuries. Henry sought to prove his rule by accumulating holy relics, and he built a special chapel to house his collection. Upon his death, the lance passed on to his son, Otto. At the Battle of Bearden in 939 AD, Otto prayed with the lance in hand until his army was victorious. His success in war against the Hungarians and subsequently against the Poles put him first in line for the mantle of Holy Roman Emperor.
In 955, he won a shattering victory over the Hungarian invaders, and he crushed their power. And already the rumors that he was more than a king and should be honored with a kind of imperial office had begun to be voiced within Germany.
Otto I thanked God for the victory, and he believed that the victory was given to him because he had the Holy Lance in his hands. And that is also interesting that Otto I gave afterwards a copy of the Holy Lance to the kings of Hungary and to kings of Poland. Both were afterwards friends of Otto I.
Otto was well aware that another lance of Longinus was in the east. Yet this lance of St. Maurice had a life of its own. Otto's grandson, Otto III, further enhanced its importance and power by inserting a nail, allegedly from the true cross of Christ. Again, it was carried into battle, and again, holy Roman emperors were victorious, overwhelming their foes. And the Holy Lance became the divine symbol of Germanic power. In 1250, during the reign of Frederick II, the Holy Lance was moved to Nuremberg, where it stayed for 550 years as part of the Holy Roman Regalia. All that remained was for Charles IV in 1350 to engrave on the lance what every one of his subjects believed, that this was the true lance and nail of Christ. But what about the appearance of other lances? It seemed that whenever there was a great battle to decide the fate of an empire in Europe, there appeared a Holy Lance on the winning side. Could this explain the strange proliferation of lances? And was this the reason for the Great Crusades? In 1095, the Emperor of Constantinople wrote a letter to Pope Urban II requesting military assistance in his war with the Turks. At a Congress of Kings, the Pope used this letter to attack the idle rule of 11th century nobility. Calling them a lot of blasphemers and plunderers, the Pope challenged them to go forward boldly as Knights of Christ and save Jerusalem. Thus, an army of Norman cavaliers hurried to save the Holy Land. So began the Great Crusades.
We can sum up chivalry as the attempt by religious authorities and others to tame the gangster nobility that normally ran or had run in the 10th and 11th centuries, roughshod over the landscape of Western Europe. And the attempt to tame them was giving them a noble ideal and an idea of a way of life. And one part of this was expressed in literary models, and a dreamlike religious quest is one of the constant themes.
The kings of Europe responded and sent their great armed horsemen to save the Holy Lands and relics of Christ from the Turks. Thousands of crusaders joined the quest. Ahead lay heat, famine, disease, and countless hardships. But they marched on from as far away as England. When they reached Constantinople, the emperor told them to go home. They were not wanted, but the crusaders went on. By the winter of 1097, these Knights of Christ laid siege to the ancient Christian town of Antioch. As weeks turned into months, the situation looked grim. A large Muslim army was marching to help lift the siege. Food and supplies were running low. Then in May 1098, there came a break. A traitor secretly ushered the Crusaders into town. By morning, it was theirs. But they only exchanged one hardship for another. Suddenly, the Muslim army arrived, and the Crusaders were the besieged of Antioch. They were tired, hungry, and outnumbered. The situation was dire. Then, a soldier stepped forward and said he had a vision from St. Andrew. He knew where to find the Holy Lance of Christ. In front of skeptics, the soldier dug in the basement of St. Peter's Cathedral and found an ancient lance. Holding it, the outnumbered, starving, ragtag Crusaders of Antioch attacked their formidable foe, and miraculously, they won.
Whether they would have achieved that without the inspiring, encouraging, inspiriting reassurance given by the discovery of a Holy Lance is doubtful. They were outnumbered. They were facing a fresh army pretty much on its own terrain. They themselves had traveled thousands of miles to get there. And so it was an extraordinary achievement, and only the passion and enthusiasm of religious fervor helps us, I think, adequately to understand it.
The victory was attributed to the power of the lance, which the Crusaders believed was the actual lance of Christ. But among them was a papal ambassador who had once seen the original lance of Longinus in Constantinople. Wisely, the ambassador kept his thoughts to himself, and the Crusaders were rejuvenated. and a year later, Jerusalem fell. Soon after, this new lance became the focus of political intrigue, and doubts rose about its authenticity. But the leader of the Crusades ignored all skeptics and offered this so-called Lance of Antioch to the emperor in Constantinople. The emperor must have been surprised and amused by these glorious claims. He already owned what he believed was the Holy Lance. Nevertheless, he accepted this new one. The appearance of this Lance of Antioch caused great confusion in Armenia, where Armenian Christians claimed to own yet another Holy Lance, and they believed it was the true relic of the crucifixion. To explain the mystery, Syrian and Armenian writers devised a series of myths and legends, and the various lances of Longinus, Constantine, and Antioch went to Constantinople. In 1204 AD, Crusaders stormed the city linking east and west, and the lances became the trophies of Baldwin II. In 1241, he sold the holy relics, including the tip of the lance of Longinus, to King Louis of France. Louis built a special reliquary in Paris for this collection, the stunningly beautiful Sainte-Chapelle. Here the tip stayed until the French Revolution. The broken shaft remained in Constantinople. The lance of Constantine and the lance of Antioch disappeared, both lost to history. When the Turks overran Constantinople in 1453, the shaft of the lance fell into their possession. In 1492, Pope Innocent VIII made an offer to the Turkish Sultan for the return of the shaft of the lance.
The Sultan and the Pope made a deal. The Pope happened to have the Sultan's brother as a prisoner, and the Sultan had the lance. They made a fair exchange, and ever since that time, the lance has purportedly been in the possession of the Vatican and is found in one of the great four piers at the crossing of St. Peter's Basilica.
The Pope's acquisition marked the end of an era. Belief in the power of relics, which ruled people during the Middle Ages, was passing. The age of mysticism and magic was giving way to the age of reason and enlightenment, or so it seemed. By the 19th century, the excitement of the Renaissance waned, and the bleak reality of industrialism turned thoughts back to the glorious age of chivalry. Once again, people believed in great quests for mystical grails and lances. But these dreams soon turned into a 20th century nightmare. The Holy Roman Empire, begun by King Charlemagne in 800 AD, ended 1,000 years later when Napoleon conquered Austria in the year 1800. The remnants of the empire fell to the Habsburg family, who had ruled the empire since the 13th century. For another 100 years, they presided over the ancient house, protecting the battle trophies of Christianity. They were the symbols of power for the old Holy Roman Empire. In 1914, the Lance of St. Maurice, the last symbol of divine rule, became a worthless relic. Yet, at that very moment, it became a valued talisman of the 20th century.
There's a German poet writing around 1800 who says something like, if the Middle Ages was a night, so nonetheless it was a night filled with stars. There was a radical re-evaluation of the Middle Ages.
Man lives not by reason alone. Man must believe in something. For 1,000 years it was Christianity, and its relics were used as the symbols of rule. But when the Roman Catholics lost their power, people sought a new cause to identify with and rally around. After the First World War, that cause was nationalism.
The national identity of all Western European people changed at the beginning of the 19th century because Romanticism made the deep roots of one's national past a crucial part of what one should study, what one should know about, and what was the source of one's values and whatever was distinctive in one's national past.
For many, interest in the Middle Ages was revived. The exploits of brave knights who risked death for the sake of honor and country were romanticized. In words, music, and culture, 19th century Europeans wallowed in Romanticism, and the origins of many romantic tales were found in the great legends of the ancient Holy Roman Empire. One artist embodied the spirit of this age, Richard Wagner.
There's around 1200, and in the opening years of the 13th century, a kind of literary renaissance in Germany. The first great renaissance of the German language and of German poetry and literature. Wagner draws on that, exploits it, uses it, and takes its energy and tries to create a Germanic mythology that will inspire his operas, but also will be a part of the self-perception of the German people.
It was from a story set in the Middle Ages that Richard Wagner composed Parsifal. The main theme of this story was Teutonic knights in search of the Holy Grail. The key to their success was the ownership of the Holy Lance, the Lance of St. Maurice, the symbol of rule for the Holy Roman Emperor. In 1912, during a performance of Parsifal in Vienna, an unemployed artist sat transfixed, absorbed in the exhilarating magic of past Germanic greatness. His name was Adolf Hitler. Hitler was very familiar with the lance in the Hofburg collection. After all, it had been owned by all his heroes, such as Frederick Barbarossa and Otto the Great, the emperors of the First Reich, men who embodied the greatness of the Germanic people. 26 years later, Hitler rode into Vienna to claim it for the Third Reich.
For Hitler, the treasure of the Holy Roman Empire was important to show to the people the tradition of the Holy Roman Empire to his own idea of a German empire in his sense. Therefore, he wanted to have the lance as a symbol of the tradition going from 10th century to the end of 20th century.
The Nazis, I think, went back to these relics and looked at them in their original meaning. That they were not just little pieces you put in glass cages, but they radiated some sort of power, or you could gain strength, or you could express strength by being closely associated with them.
The Holy Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years. Hitler's Third Reich was planned to last another 1,000 years. But unlike the First Reich, it would be neither holy nor Roman. Hitler despised Christianity and feared Catholicism. His rule would take the form expressed by his favorite philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote the doctrine of will to power, a race of supermen to rise above the rabble and rule with an iron fist. He found the Christian belief of turning the other cheek ridiculous and described Jesus of Nazareth as an idiot who deserved to be killed by the Romans. In 1938, Hitler took possession of the lance believed to have stabbed Jesus the Jew. In Hitler's hands, the lance would not be a symbol of redemption and divine rulership, but a symbol for ethnic cleansing and tyranny. The man in charge of Nazi genocide, Heinrich Himmler, regarded his work with the SS as a quasi-religious quest. Himmler's obsession with Germanic racial purity led to the setting up of a bureau designated to make scientific studies of all facets of Germanic identity.
Himmler took this as we know, not only serious personally, in terms of actually participating in these events, making an effort to make sure that everything was done right, but in terms of finding funds, finding researchers, serious archaeologists, historians, by the dozens, to dig up historical sites, find relics, find the bones of Henry I.
Himmler greatly admired Henry I, the founder of Germany, and he believed that he was Henry's direct descendant. Himmler took over the church where Henry had kept the lance and other sacred relics. Here he organized SS-style religious ceremonies. At the famous triangular castle of Wewelsburg, Himmler fitted out the bedrooms in the style of the eras of his favorite German emperors. He slept in the Henry I room. When Hitler seized the lance and Habsburg treasures in Vienna, Himmler hoped that Hitler would give him the lance. All he received was a copy. The real one was taken to the St. Catherine Cathedral in Nuremberg, the city where it had resided during the First Reich.
Nuremberg had an important place throughout German history, particularly in the most powerful decades and centuries of the Holy Roman Empire. It was the seat, it was the capital of Germany. And as the name indicates, Holy Roman Empire, the First Reich.
The Lance of St. Maurice was exhibited at rallies held in Nuremberg during 1938 and 39. As the war intensified in the 1940s and Allied bombers began targeting Nuremberg, extraordinary measures were taken to protect the lance. It was moved from the Church of the Holy Ghost to a bank vault. When that proved inadequate, a special underground vault was built 500 feet beneath Nuremberg Castle.
I can't see this as an expression of just being concerned about the material value. The Nazis felt they needed to protect so they could be used again once the war is over, and they would rise again, or the Germans would rise again, with or without the Nazis.
On April 20th, 1945, General Mark Clark of the U.S. 7th Army discovered the lance and the Habsburg treasures under the Nuremberg fortress. The nightmare was finally over. Adolf Hitler's Third Reich had fallen. On the 7th of January, 1946, the Lance of St. Maurice was returned to the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, where it remains today. A copy of the lance made by Otto the Great and given to the Polish people is still at Krakow Cathedral. The Lance of Antioch, which inspired the Crusaders in 1098, has been lost to history, as has the Lance of Constantine. The Lance of Echmedesian is now a cultural treasure of the Armenian people, and the shaft of the Lance of Longinus is still at the Vatican. During the French Revolution, the tip of the Lance of Longinus was moved from Sainte-Chapelle to the Bibliothèque Nationale, then lost. But there's a footnote to the story.
When Pope Benedict XIV was on the papal throne, he sent an emissary to Paris to see exactly what that tip of the lance blade looked like and to have a drawing made to its exact dimensions. This was brought back to Rome, and he was satisfied that the two formed one blade.
What happened to the real lance? It doesn't matter. It's what people believe. Belief tracing back to a mystery that began 2,000 years ago on a desolate hill outside Jerusalem at the execution of a carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus.